25 Mustang horse saves little boy abandoned in the desert and leads him to an unbelievable encounter in the heart of the painted desert, where the sun scorches the earth and hope evaporates with the wind. A 7-year-old boy lies abandoned, left to die by the only family he thought he had. But when all seems lost, help arrives in the most unexpected form. A Mustang once tamed by a fallen war hero. What follows is not just a tale of survival but of destiny, discovery, and a bond that defies explanation. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comment. And if this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable journeys like this one. The morning light fell softly upon a modest ranch house, sitting about 10 miles away from the center of Prescott, Arizona. This area was unique. On one side there were patches of pine trees and rolling hills, while on the other, parched land with crumbling soil hinted at the rugged terrain of the desert beyond. It was neither fully lush nor completely barren, but rather a curious blend of both. This was the place Eli Navarro called home. Eli was 7 years old, with large hazel eyes that often reflected an inner courage mixed with perpetual weariness. Anybody who saw him up close might notice the mild tremor in his hands, or the faint redness on his wrists, evidence of a condition that plagued him day and night. Yet despite the physical toll, Eli remained gentle, observant, and soft-spoken. He was not the kind of boy who whined often or demanded attention. He seemed in many ways older than his years. Living with Eli in that old ranch house was his mother, Claire Bennett, once Claire Monroe before she had married Eli's father, the late Captain Jack Bennett. Claire was a strong woman, both in heart and bearing, though at times her posture carried the weight of worry. She had known love, loss, and the challenges that came with raising a chronically ill child. Whenever she glanced at Eli, there was a tenderness in her eyes that spoke of fierce protection. To keep their household running, Claire had taken on part-time bookkeeping for a few local businesses in town. Not long after Captain Jack's death, Claire had remarried a man named Travis Miller, hoping to bring stability back into her son's life. But the dynamic was far from what she had imagined. Travis lived under the same roof, yet their home felt strangely more hollow than before. He contributed financially for a while, seemed polite at first, but over time distance and tension had grown, especially around the subject of Eli's illness. Eli's medical condition was mysterious, an autoimmune disorder that caused sudden fevers, patches of inflamed skin, and flare-ups in his joints. Sometimes his legs ached so much that he limped around the ranch yard. Other times he seemed perfectly normal, albeit a bit fatigued. Claire had taken him to major hospitals in Phoenix and beyond. She had sought the opinions of specialists who all shrugged, offered partial diagnoses, then prescribed meds that only somewhat alleviated his symptoms, because the disease was not named. Eli grew used to hearing people call it the unknown illness, or that rare condition. If he ventured into a hospital waiting room, other children might stare at the red blotches on his arms. Although the blotches were not constant, they appeared in cycles, especially when the fever struck. A few times, doctors mentioned possible lupus variants or mixed connective tissue disease, but none of the standard treatments fully worked. Claire had poured a great deal of hope and money into new therapies, always returning with the sober realization that they provided only temporary relief. In that uncertain world, Eli found unwavering solace in stories about his father, Captain Jack Bennett. Jack had been a respected Army officer who served overseas. During one mission abroad, he lost his life in combat when Eli was only 4 years old, leaving behind not only his wife and child, but also an extraordinary legacy. The neighbors and Jack's military comrades spoke about him as if he had been larger than life, brave, good-humored, and gifted in ways that few could fathom. But the stories that fascinated Eli the most were about his father's talent for taming wild horses, particularly Mustang. Arizona had its share of wild horses, roaming the desert plains or the reservation lands near the Salt River. Somehow Jack Bennett had possessed a near-mystical knack for bonding with these majestic creatures. He taught them trust and discipline while preserving their innate spirit. Before he deployed for his final mission, Captain Jack had taken in one specific Mustang, a spirited, dark-coated stallion with a distinctive white marking along its left flank. He named the horse Blaze because, Jack once said, when he runs through the sunlit desert, It looks like a streak of fire flashing against the land. And so, that final gift. Blaze remained with the family even after Jack's passing. In a way, it was as if the father had left behind a guardian to watch over his son. From the time Eli could stand on his own 2 feet, Blaze had been part of his daily life. Despite being a horse with a proud, wild lineage, the Mustang seemed to sense Eli's fragility and recognized the boy as someone to protect rather than to fear. Blaze would lower his magnificent head whenever Eli approached, let the child pet him, and remain quiet even if other ranch hands said Mustangs could be temperamental. Over time, people commented, "It's like the horse knows that boy is special." Whenever Eli suffered those throbbing joint pains or hives that blistered across his chest and arms, Blaze would stand nearby as if vigilantly on guard. On multiple occasions, Claire caught Eli dozing off in the stable, his head resting on Blaze's flank while the Mustang simply stared out the open door, ears flicking at every noise. Claire herself believed wholeheartedly in the bond between them, once telling Eli, "Blaze isn't just a horse, sweetheart. He's the spirit your father left behind, an extension of his heart." The dynamic in the household, however, was far from peaceful. Travis Miller, Claire's second husband, had gradually become distant and resentful. He had initially acted considerate, sometimes even driving Eli to doctor appointments in Prescott or checking if the boy needed anything when Claire was busy. That courtesy faded over time. The man started to complain about the mounting medical bills, the nights they lost sleep whenever Eli's fever spiked, and the continuous sense of restriction as if he could not live his own life freely. In hushed arguments with Claire, he repeatedly hammered one point: "We're throwing away money on a hopeless case. The doctors can't even name it. How long can we keep doing this?" Claire tried to reason with him, reminding Travis that a child's well-being mattered above all. But the more she insisted, the more Travis slipped into cold bitterness. Eventually, he all but stopped pretending to care for Eli. He would come home from work, stomp through the house in a brooding silence, or utter snide remarks about how Eli was draining their resources. Eli, sharp as he was, sensed that hostility. He picked up on how Travis rarely even looked him in the eye anymore, even if Travis said nothing overtly cruel in front of Claire. The tension was palpable. Eli often retreated to the stable, burying his face in Blaze's neck to forget the ache in his heart. He knew with childish clarity that his existence was an inconvenience for his stepfather. This slow burn of resentment set the stage for a tragedy no one imagined could actually happen. But life on that small ranch, once illuminated by memories of a father hero and the warmth of a mother's love, was now overshadowed by the cold presence of a stepfather reaching his breaking point. The signs were there, in the sleepless nights, and the ever-dwindling patience of a man who looked at Eli as nothing more than a burden. And for Eli, all he could do was cling to hope. If not for himself, then for the sake of the father whose legacy he wanted to honor. And for Blaze, who seemed to contain a spark of that father's spirit. Little did the boy know how quickly that hope would be tested in the days to come. When Travis Miller made a decision that would forever alter Eli's life, it happened on a day that began like any other, or so it seemed. The night before, Eli had been seized by another violent bout of fever. His small frame convulsed in chills, and Claire stayed awake, pressing cold compresses to his forehead, checking his temperature, whispering lullabies to soothe him. Travis stood by the bedroom door for a few minutes, arms folded, his face unreadable. Then he walked away. Perhaps in that moment, he realized some new resolution inside himself. At sunrise, Eli's fever broke, leaving him weak and drenched in sweat. Claire gently dabbed him off with a towel. To her surprise, Travis stepped into the room looking uncharacteristically upbeat. There was a half-smile on his lips that Claire had not seen in months. "Eli," he said, turning directly to the boy, "how about we take a ride today? Just you and me. Get you some fresh air." Claire nearly dropped the washcloth. "Travis, you want to take him out?" She blinked, searching his face for any hint of sarcasm. Travis shrugged. "Sure. The kid's cooped up here all the time. Maybe some desert air will do him good." In that instant, Claire's heart soared with relief. She'd prayed for Travis to show some paternal care. Maybe, she thought, he had turned a corner, realized he needed to step up for Eli. She clasped her hands together and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in a long while, she hoped they might function as a real family. Eli, though weary, forced himself upright. His legs felt rubbery from the fever, but he managed to stand with Claire's help. The idea of going anywhere with Travis, this man who had grown distant, was surprising. But there was a small flicker of optimism in Eli's chest. He dressed slowly, pulling on jeans and a light jacket. Claire tucked a sandwich, a few energy bars and a couple of water bottles into a small cooler bag, along with some pain meds just in case. She kissed Eli's forehead. "Have fun, sweetie, and be careful." They stepped outside. The air was crisp, but not yet blazing hot. The eastern horizon glowed orange, a typical dawn for Arizona. As they approached Travis's dusty SUV, Blaze let out a long, sharp whinny from the stable. The Mustang was clearly agitated, pawing at the ground as if sensing something amiss. The horse shook his head, mane tossing in frustration. He took a few steps, trying to nudge the stall door. Eli turned to look at Blaze, an ache of longing in his eyes. "Easy, boy," Travis said, suddenly cold. He walked over and slammed the stable door shut, then latched it tight. "This trip isn't for you, Blaze." Need again scraping the floor as if in protest. Eli bit his lip, feeling guilty for leaving his loyal companion behind. The boy climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the small cooler against his chest. There was a tremor of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, Travis wanted to bond with him at last. Claire stood on the porch, arms folded around herself, and waved as they drove off. She wore a hopeful smile. The road soon turned from the gravel outskirts of Prescott to more desolate paths leading into the painted desert region. Eli stared out the window, watching as clusters of brush and cacti replaced the final glimpses of pine. The further they went, the fewer signs of civilization appeared. Dust devils spun across the horizon, and the sun began to climb higher, intensifying the light and heat. "Travis, where are we going?" Eli asked quietly. After nearly an hour of silence, the man gripped the steering wheel tight, knuckles whitening, jaw set. "Somewhere no one will bother us," he muttered without turning his head. Eli shrank back into his seat. The tone in Travis's voice was unnerving, carrying a simmering tension he couldn't define. He fell silent, not sure how to respond. The dryness in the air made him cough a couple of times, so he took small sips of water, mindful not to drink too much in case he needed it later. Eventually, the SUV rumbled off any semblance of a main road, heading deeper into the desert. The land became stark, fine red dust, scattered rocks, and the occasional spiny shrub. There were no telephone poles or houses in sight, just an endless sweep of sun-scorched terrain. At last, Travis brought the vehicle to a stop near a wide-open space, bordered by tall, striated rock formations. He shoved the gear into park, turned off the engine, and exhaled. For a moment, neither of them moved. The heat pressed in like a physical presence. Eli swallowed, a pit of dread forming in his stomach as he glanced around. Why here? They were in the middle of nowhere. Travis got out first, went around the back, and popped open the trunk. He pulled out a small backpack. Eli couldn't see what was inside until Travis walked to the passenger side and flung the door open. "Out," he commanded. Confusion washed over Eli's face. What? I thought we were..." "Just get out," Travis snapped, his voice trembling with pent-up frustration. Eli slid out of the seat, still clutching the cooler bag. The sun hit him with full force, making him squint and raise a hand to shield his eyes. "This," Travis said, tossing the backpack into the sand at Eli's feet, "has water, some snacks, maybe enough to keep you alive for a day or two." The man's eyes looked hollow, as though he hadn't slept in ages. "I can't do this anymore. Eli, your mother, she's killing us financially. I can't watch everything slip away." Eli's heart pounded in disbelief. "But we can go back. I promise I won't cost too much." Travis shook his head, his voice bitter. "You already cost too much. In every way, this is the only way out." The next moments were a blur. Eli felt tears stinging his eyes, the dryness of the desert wind intensifying the burn. He tried to protest, stepping forward to grab Travis's arm. "You can't leave me here. I'll die." Travis jerked away, disgust twisting his features. "If you make it out alive, well, good for you. But I'm done. Do you understand?" He turned on his heel, stomped back to the driver's side, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life. Eli shouted after him, voice cracking, but the SUV kicked up a whirlwind of red dust as it sped away. In the midst of that swirling haze, Eli dropped to his knees, tears mixing with the grit that lashed his face. It felt unreal, like a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken. He heard the diminishing growl of the engine fade into the empty horizon, leaving only the shrieking silence of the desert. Sand caked his shoes and the scorching sun bore down. Unrelenting, he inhaled raggedly. "Mom," he whispered, though Claire was far away. There was no one here, no roads, no phone reception, and no shade aside from a few towering rocks. He looked down at the backpack that Travis had thrown in the sand. Opening it with shaking hands, he found a small bottle of water, maybe half a liter, 2 sandwiches in plastic wrap, and a single protein bar. In that crushing solitude, Eli realized just how precarious his situation was. This was not a joke or a temporary punishment. Travis had truly callously abandoned him, a sick child, to the desert. Every fiber of Eli's being told him he had to move, somewhere, anywhere. The painted desert's morning sun was growing harsher by the minute, and soon the temperature would be unbearable. He could still see faint tire tracks in the sand, but the wind was picking up. "I have to try to follow," he thought. Perhaps if he managed to find the road again, maybe some passing vehicle would save him. Weak as he was, he resolved to walk in the direction Travis's SUV had gone, hoping beyond reason that Travis might change his mind and come back. It was a desperate thought, but it was all he had. With each step, his feet sank slightly in the sand. Within minutes, sweat drenched his shirt. The day was growing hotter, turning the desert into a fiery crucible. The dryness scraped his throat, but he knew he had to ration his water. A swallow now, maybe another in half an hour. The dizziness came in waves, forcing him to pause off. After perhaps half a mile, his legs started to give out, staggering to a halt near a jagged outcrop of reddish rock. Eli sank to the ground. A nauseating combination of fear and exhaustion overwhelmed him. The last words Travis had hurled at him reverberated through his mind. "You shouldn't exist." The cruelty of that statement hit harder than the sun overhead. For a few minutes, he curled into himself, pressing his forehead against his knees, wishing this was all just a sick fantasy. Yet no amount of denial would alter the reality. He was alone, left to die in the painted desert. The first hours of his abandonment passed like a hazy dream. Eli slid around the rocky surface, trying to find the slightest patch of shade from a protruding ledge. The sun soared higher, bleaching color from the sky. He sipped water once or twice, just enough to keep from fainting. His fever had subsided that morning, but the stress and intense heat threatened to trigger another flare. Already faint blotches were appearing on his wrists, an ominous sign that his illness was stirring. He couldn't stay in one place forever. The painted desert was known for scorching days and surprisingly frigid nights. If he didn't figure something out, he would either succumb to heat stroke or freeze after sunset. Summoning what remained of his resolve, Eli crawled back to his feet, clutched the backpack, and hobbled forward in the direction he assumed was the road. But after a few hundred yards, his body revolted, pain shot through his joints, and a wave of dizziness sent him stumbling to his knees. Gasping for air, he realized how little energy he had left. The overhead sun felt like a hammer. His shoulders, neck, and arms were growing raw under the relentless UV glare. The ground itself radiated heat, strong enough that it nearly scorched his palm. If not for the bit of shade from scattered rock formations, he'd have collapsed. Eventually, he found another meager overhang and slumped there, chest heaving. His mind drifted to memories of Claire. He pictured her in the kitchen, wearing that tired but reassuring smile, making soup while he rested in bed during a fever. He pictured her excitement whenever she spoke about some new hospital specialist who might finally crack this disease. Then he remembered Blaze, how the Mustang would trot around him if he ventured into the corral, as though monitoring every step. The memory of Blaze made him ache with longing. Why had Travis locked the stable? Because he didn't want the horse to follow. Perhaps time lost its meaning in that lonely expanse. The sun rolled across the sky, shadows shrinking to nothing at noon, then slowly elongating as afternoon wore on. Eli's sandwich, half-eaten, turned dry in the oppressive heat, but he forced himself to finish it. The final sips of water dwindled. His lips cracked from dehydration. Sometime mid-afternoon, exhaustion overcame him, and he drifted into a fitful doze. propped against a rock. He dreamed of Captain Jack, a blurred figure in army fatigues, calling his name from somewhere beyond the desert hills. When he woke, the temperature had shifted slightly. The sun was no longer directly overhead. He blinked, disoriented, until the dryness in his throat reminded him where he was. With dread, he tilted the water bottle. Only a few mouthfuls remained. Another wave of pain coursed through his arms and legs, as if the disease was flaring up again. Angry red patches formed along his forearms. He tried not to cry, because tears were water he couldn't afford to lose. "Dad, if you can hear me, help me," he whispered. Scanning the horizon, there was nothing. No sign of a human being. No sign of Travis's SUV. The hours dragged on. Eli dozed off again, despite the fear telling him to stay alert. Sleep was his body's only respite. Suddenly, he was startled by a noise. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then it came again, a distant whinny. He lifted his head, heart pounding. Could it be a wild horse? He forced himself upright, ignoring the searing pain in his joints. The whinny sounded again, nearer this time, and he realized it was a horse's call. His thoughts leapt to Blaze, but that was impossible. Travis had locked the stable. Could the Mustang really have escaped and traced Eli's path across miles of desert? Another neigh, sharper, cut through the air, and over a crest of sand he saw movement. A dark figure galloping across the dune, mane billowing in the fading sunlight. Eli's heart nearly stopped. The figure drew closer, revealing itself unmistakably as Blaze. Sleek, powerful, and undeniably determined, the Mustang must have broken free, following some primal bond that led him to his young rider. Trembling with relief, Eli staggered up from the rock's shade, tears welling in his eyes. "Blaze!" His voice cracked. He tried to shout louder. "Blaze!" The stallion slid to a halt a few yards away, nostrils flaring, chest heaving from the long run. There was a wild intensity in Blaze's eyes, as though searching for injury. Carefully, the horse approached, lowered his head, and sniffed at the boy's arm. Eli threw his arms around Blaze's neck, letting out the sobs he'd been holding in ever since Travis had driven away. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he felt safe. Blaze nudged him gently, then turned, as if to encourage him to climb on. Normally, Eli would have used a saddle or at least a halter, but he had neither. With shaky hands, he fumbled for a short lead rope in the backpack, standard emergency gear Claire always insisted on. He looped it around Blaze's neck, though the Mustang hardly needed guidance. Summoning the last of his strength, Eli hoisted himself onto the horse's back. He draped his arms across Blaze's muscular neck, body still quivering from near heat exhaustion. The horse let out a soft neigh, like a reassuring whisper. "I'm here, don't give up." In that moment, the desert no longer felt completely merciless. They spent the remainder of the afternoon seeking a path back toward civilization. Eli's sense of direction was hazy, but from the position of the sun, he guessed that the road might lie west. He let Blaze take the lead, trusting the animal's instinct. The horse walked with cautious steps at first, mindful of the boy's fragile state. As daylight waned, the harsh heat began to yield to an evening chill. Eli's skin, earlier burning, now prickled under a sudden breeze, but at least he had the warmth of Blaze beneath him. Each gentle sway of the Mustang's body brought him a step closer to hope. They paused occasionally so Eli could rest, nibble what was left of his food, and give Blaze a moment to catch his breath. With the sky turning shades of orange and pink, they crested a ridge. In the distance, a faint glimmer of light flickered. Could be a settlement. A ranch? Or maybe just passing headlights. Eli's heart thumped with anticipation. "We need to go that way," he murmured into Blaze's ear. Tapping the horse's shoulder lightly, Blaze lifted his head. Ears perked, as if acknowledging the command. The Mustang broke into a cautious trot. Every jolt sent a twinge of pain through Eli's inflamed joints, but he gritted his teeth, knowing rescue might be near. Even if it was just a single house, there was a chance for water, for help, for contacting his mother. Anything was better than certain death in the endless dunes. Night fell quickly in the desert, swallowing the land in long shadows. The temperature dropped more drastically than Eli had expected. His sweaty clothes made him shiver. He clung to Blaze, burying his face in the horse's mane to steal some warmth. The occasional coyote howl echoed in the distance, but Blaze stayed calm, forging ahead. The morning sun was gentler than the afternoon blaze,
yet Eli could feel the fever stirring again in his joint. Blaze sniffed the air and the ground, seeming agitated. That was when Eli spotted it. Faint tire tracks pressed into the sand. They were fresh enough not to be obliterated by the desert wind, leading off in a winding trail. Could it be Travis's vehicle, or someone else entirely? Eli felt a flicker of hope where there were tire marks. There might be people, or a road, or at least some clue. He adjusted his seat on Blaze's back, ignoring the stab of pain in his knees. "Let's check it out, buddy," he murmured, patting the Mustang's neck. Blaze let out a short, sharp whinny as if to say, "I'm ready." They followed the tracks for nearly 2 hours. Eli took small sips from the new water canteen gifted by the travelers earlier. The sun climbed, and the boy's forehead again glistened with sweat. Buddy clung to Blaze's mane with quiet determination. Finally, they crested a small ridge and spotted a jeep parked at a precarious angle near the rim of a shallow canyon. Jagged red rocks and scattered rubble suggested a dried-out riverbed or an old water. Urging Blaze forward, Eli approached the vehicle carefully. No voices, no movement, just eerie silence. Even the engine was cold, indicating it had been there for some time. Blaze came to a stop a few yards away, pawing the ground anxiously. Eli slid off the Mustang, legs shaking. He crept around the side of the Jeep and saw, to his shock, a man lying motionless in the thin sliver of shade the vehicle provided. The man's face was sunburned a fiery crimson, lips cracked, and his thin frame suggested days of dehydration. The most jarring detail for Eli, however, was the pattern of red, splotchy rashes on the man's neck and forearms, reminiscent of Eli's own strange skin flare-ups. For a moment, fear gripped him. What if he's already dead? But something spurred him onward. He crouched and put a trembling hand near the man's face. A faint breath stirred the air. He was alive, just barely. Eli glanced over his shoulder at Blaze, who tossed his head as if to say, "We can't just leave him." Gathering his courage, the boy gently shook the man's shoulder. Can you hear me?" No response. The man remained limp, eyes shut, chest barely moving. Eli swallowed hard, scanning the Jeep's open driver door for supplies. He spotted a canteen, but it was empty. "I have my own water," but so little left. Inside Eli's backpack rested a half-full bottle of water, the final remnant of what the travelers had given him. If he used it now, he and Blaze might be in peril later. But the alternative, watching this stranger die, was unthinkable. He hesitated, tears pricking his eyes from a mix of indecision and the dryness of the desert. Then, with a resolute sigh, he uncapped the bottle. Tilting the man's head slightly, he dribbled a few drops onto the man's cracked lips. At first, there was no reaction. Then, slowly, the man's lips parted and a rasping breath escaped. Eli continued to drip water carefully, pulse thrumming in his ears. The man's eyelids fluttered. His body jerked faintly as he tried to swallow.
He whispered something unintelligible. Encouraged, Eli offered another small trickle. If he poured too fast, the man might choke. Finally, the stranger emitted a shaky exhale that sounded almost like relief. Several agonizing seconds passed before the stranger's eyes peeled open. They were bloodshot, as though baked by the desert glare. When he spoke, his voice was a ragged whisper, carried away by the faint breeze. "Who are you?" He managed, hardly louder than Eli exhaled shakily, his heart pounding. "My name is Eli. And this," he gestured at Blaze, who was standing close by, ears pricked. "This is Blaze. We found you out here." The man coughed, a dry, painful sound, and with an effort let out a ghost of a laugh. "I suppose I owe you both my life, or what's left of it." He clenched his eyes shut, then reopened them. "I'm Dr. Ethan Walker. Came to this desert, looking for a rare plant, but looks like I'm dying from my own disease." "Disease?" The boy's eyes widened. He unconsciously rubbed at the red blotches on his wrist. "You're sick like me." Ethan blinked, focusing on Eli's skin. "Those patches, the pain in your joints." He coughed again. "How old are you?" 7, Eli said softly. Ethan sucked in a harsh breath. 30 years I've suffered. Invested millions in research, and now I meet a child with the same condition. Unbelievable." Despite the scorching heat and the man's frailty, the two managed a brief, urgent exchange of medical histories. Ethan's condition, it turned out, mirrored Eli's symptoms. Autoimmune flares, rashes, crippling pain. But Ethan explained in broken sentences. that he'd never encountered a single living person with the exact same markers. He'd poured his fortune into labs and gene studies, yet always came up empty. Eli listened, half in awe, half in confusion. He was just a kid who had known endless tests, hospital corridors, and the heartbreak of inconclusive results. That this grown-up stranger shared the same mysterious illness felt both terrifying and oddly comforting. Ethan's eyes glinted with a peculiar excitement amid his exhaustion. It's almost as if meeting you was the true point of my trip. I was chasing rumors of a desert herb, but you might be the real key. Eli didn't fully grasp the implications. He only knew that a spark of something monumental had been lit. Gently stroking Blaze's mane, he murmured, "We're both stuck here, though if we can't find a way out, it doesn't matter." Ethan tried to push himself upright, grimacing at the acute pain in his wrists. "Yes, at first we must survive. Then maybe we can talk about cure." The Jeep was in decent mechanical shape, except for one major problem. The battery was completely dead, likely drained from leaving the electronics on too long in the desert heat. If they could just get it rolling, they might jump-start it by popping the clutch in second gear. The question was, who would do the pushing? Ethan's arms trembled when he so much as lifted them. Eli was only 7, though sturdy in spirit. Blaze was strong enough to pull, but hooking a horse to a Jeep in soft desert sands posed its own challenge. Regardless, they had no other choice. The nearest help was far away, and the desert sun would soon climb higher. "We'll figure something out," Eli murmured, as much to himself as to Ethan. Blaze snorted softly. Perhaps between the three of them they could cheat death a little while longer. After a tense hour of rest and planning, the desert morning blazed into a white-hot midday. If they failed to move soon, the heat might render them immobile for good. Ethan managed to stand, bracing himself against the Jeep, while Eli rummaged through the cargo area, searching for any rope or harness that might help attach Blaze. They discovered a coiled length of rope, frayed but usable. With Ethan's shaky guidance, they fashioned a makeshift harness around Blaze's chest and shoulders, though it was more akin to a set of loosely tied loops than proper tack. Eli then slung an old saddle blanket over Blaze's back to cushion the rope's edges. The plan was for the Mustang to pull forward, dragging the Jeep just enough for the wheels to turn and the engine to catch. Ethan eyed the boy and the horse skeptically. "This is insane, you know," he rasped. "A kid, a sick man, and a wild Mustang, jump-starting a vehicle in the middle of nowhere." Eli gave a small, determined smile. "Blaze can do it. He didn't let me die out here, and he won't let you either." It was hardly scientific, but something about Eli's unshakable belief stirred Ethan's resolve. They positioned Blaze in front of the Jeep, the rope taut. Ethan climbed behind the wheel, carefully maneuvering his legs. Eli stood beside the passenger door, one hand on the frame to brace himself. "All right, let's try," Ethan said, turning the key in the ignition to the Owen position. Though the engine wouldn't crank. "Eli, see if you can keep the wheels straight once we're moving." Blaze snorted at the desert air, then leaned forward. The Jeep jerked, tires skidding in the loose sand. A grating screech emerged, but the vehicle barely budged. On the second try, the wheels turned slightly, but the rope slackened when Blaze lost traction. Ethan broke into a coughing fit, forcing him to kill the ignition again. Eli overheated, swayed on his feet, a wave of dizziness forcing him to rest. Blaze panted, flecks of foam forming at the corners of his mouth. The combination of weight, friction, and scorching sun made each attempt punishing. They tried 2 or 3 times more, with the same disheartening outcome. The Jeep refused to roll far enough to pop the clutch. Ethan cursed under his breath, sweat pouring down his temples, while Eli nearly collapsed from fatigue. Yet Blaze, though breathing heavily, pawed at the ground as if to say he was ready for more. Eli sank to his knees, struggling to maintain composure. He looked at the small slope not far from them, a gentle downward grade that ended in a sandy ravine. "What if," he panted, "we push the Jeep over there?" Blaze might have better luck pulling on a slope. Ethan followed the boy's gaze. It was a risk, because if they gained too much momentum and couldn't control the Jeep, they might crash. Still, desperation spurred them on. They guided Blaze and the Jeep slowly over to the top of that slight descent. "I'll get in the driver's seat," Ethan grunted, hoisting himself. "Eli, You handle the steering until I can jump to the pedals. Eli blinked. But I can barely see over the wheel. Use your knees on the seat, Ethan said. Voice tense. We just need a push. Then I'll handle the gear shift. When I say now, you shout. I'll slam it into second. Dump the clutch. If we're lucky, the engine catches. Blaze seemed to sense the urgency. As soon as they were positioned, the Mustang lunged forward. Rope pulled taut. The Jeep began to roll downhill, picking up speed. Now, kid, Ethan cried. Eli tightened his grip on the wheel, standing on his knee. The Jeep rattled, bouncing over small rocks. Now, he shouted, voice cracking. Ethan twisted the ignition key, jammed the gear stick into second, and released the clutch. For a moment it felt like the entire world seized in place. Then the engine caught, once, twice, and roared to life in a cacophony of grinding metal. A wave of exhilaration hit them. Ethan jabbed the accelerator gently, the Jeep rolling under its own power. Blaze, still tethered, nearly lost his footing, but managed to canter alongside. Ethan reached over to steady the steering wheel, while Eli scrambled into the passenger seat. Heart thudding, they let out cheers, ragged, breathless cries of victory. The Jeep's engine, though sputtering, was running. The rope had to be loosened, so Blaze could run freely beside them. With a gick flick, Eli released the makeshift harness from the window. As they drove, the desert around them glowed under the molten gold of late afternoon. Ethan could only steer with minimal arm movement, so Eli helped keep the wheel steady from the passenger side. Blaze galloped alongside, hooves kicking up clouds of red dust, mane backlit by the setting sun. Eli felt a lump in his throat. The sight was beautiful and absurd. A battered Jeep, a wounded man with an unknown disease, a 7-year-old boy, and a magnificent Mustang forging a path out of doom. Each breath felt like borrowed time. They traveled for a couple of hours at a slow pace to avoid draining precious fuel. As twilight deepened, Ethan pointed to a faint glow on the horizon, a cluster of lights near the base of a hill. But it could be a town, he murmured. We'll head there. With luck, we'll find real help. Eli's exhaustion melted into elation. We're going to be okay, he whispered. Blaze answered with a triumphant neigh, as though validating their fragile hopes. Night settled in quickly, but Ethan held the Jeep steady by the faint illumination of the headlight. At last they rolled into a tiny settlement that seemed straight out of an old western dry hollow. Wooden structures, dusty porches, and a lone windmill greeted them under flickering street lamp. The Jeep sputtered across what passed for a town square, no more than a broad intersection of two dirt roads. A handful of startled townsfolk emerged from their houses. Eli, so tired he could barely unbuckle his seatbelt, almost collapsed out the door. Blaze stopped a few paces behind, sides heaving from thirst. An older woman with a wiry build and gray hair pinned in a bun hurried over. Good Lord, son, she turned and shouted to a man wearing suspenders. Hank, get Dr. Brooks. These people need help. Ethan managed to roll down the window. He coughed, voice rasping. We need water, medicine, anything. Before another word left his lips, his eyes rolled back and he went limp, slumping over the wheel. Within minutes, the townspeople sprang into action. The gray-haired woman introduced herself as Maggie Cooper, while guiding Eli toward a small structure that served as a makeshift clinic. Bring him too, Maggie said, nodding to Ethan. And don't you leave that poor horse out in the sun. Hank, tie it up near the trough. An older gentleman, Dr. Samuel Brooks, wearing thick spectacles, ushered them into a cool room lined with basic medical supplies. He swiftly set up an IV line for Ethan and sponged his sunburned skin with water laced with herbal extracts. Meanwhile, Eli was gently laid on a cot. Although his fever raged, the clinic's cooler interior was a godsend. Outside, Blaze was tethered but remained restless, pacing near a window, occasionally neighing as if to check on Eli. Maggie looked out and couldn't help but exclaim, "Never seen a horse so attached to a boy. It's like he's guarding him." Over the next few hours, Ethan received IV fluids to combat dehydration. His cracked lips and harsh cough softened into a more stable rhythm. Brooks massaged a herbal salve into the rash on Ethan's arms, frowning at how the pattern mimicked an autoimmune condition he'd seldom encountered. As for Eli, sips of electrolyte solution and a chance to rest allowed his fever to lower slightly. "I've never treated a case quite like this, Dr. Brooks told Maggie, nodding toward the unconscious Ethan. He's got all the hallmarks of a severe immune disorder. And the boy's similar. Though younger, Maggie pressed a hand to her mouth. Concern etched on her face. Outside, dusk gave way to a cooler desert night. Lanterns glowed along the wooden porches, and a few curious townspeople hovered near the clinic. "They'll be all right," Maggie told them, ever the optimist, though her eyes revealed deep worry. When Eli awakened, still groggy but alive, the first thing he asked for was a telephone. Maggie guided him to an ancient rotary phone in the corner of a cramped supply room, where a single overhead bulb flickered. Eli dialed the number he knew by heart. "Home." Claire's voice crackled on the line, heavy with panic. "Hello? Who is this?" Eli nearly choked on his words. "Mom, it's me. I'm in a town called Dry Hollow." He barely had time to speak before Claire's sobs flooded the receiver. "Eli? Oh my God. Baby, you're alive?" Maggie took the phone, explained the location and the situation. Claire insisted she would find a way there as soon as possible. When the call ended, Eli felt tears welling up in relief. For the first time since being abandoned, he felt a tangible sense of safety. Late that night, in the dim glow of a lantern, Ethan stirred, glancing at Eli still resting under a thin blanket. He realized that if not for this boy, he'd have perished. More than that, their shared disease might be more than coincidence. It might be fate. Turning his gaze to the window, he could just make out Blaze's silhouette, head raised toward the stars. Ethan's chest tightened. A child, a horse, and a dying researcher, all crossing paths in the desert. If that's not destiny, I don't know what is. Morning came with a gentle warmth, far kinder than the desert's searing midday. Ethan woke to find his IV bag nearly empty, his body still aching but functioning better than before. Dr. Brooks hovered nearby, adjusting the drip. Eli, sitting on the edge of his own cot, offered a small wave. "You feeling better?" Dr. Brooks explained that he'd taken blood samples from both Ethan and Eli. His clinic was humble, but he did have a microscope and some rudimentary lab tools, enough to test for certain cells and antibodies. That morning, he'd spent an hour hunched over slides, meticulously comparing the samples. When he finally straightened up, the doctor's face was alight with astonishment. "Young man," he said, addressing Ethan, "in my 50 years of practicing medicine, I've never seen anything like this. The boy's immune cells exhibit, well, let's call it a self-correcting property. His body is producing a type of antibody that appears to quell inflammatory responses in real time." Ethan's mouth went dry. "That can't be possible. I've spent decades searching for exactly that phenomenon." Yet Dr. Brooks insisted, describing how the boy's white blood cells seemed specialized to neutralize the same abnormal proteins that raged unchecked in Ethan's bloodstream. "He's been ill, obviously, but it's as though his body has found a partial adaptation." Eli listened, frowning slightly. "So does that mean I'm not as sick as I feel?" Ethan managed a shaky laugh. "It might mean you're the key to something huge." The difference, Dr. Brooks said, lay in the fact that Ethan's condition had manifested in late adolescence, giving his body little chance to adapt. Meanwhile, Eli was born with it. From infancy, it seemed his system had gradually developed unique antibodies to fight the disease. Ethan rubbed his temples, his mind churning with scientific curiosity and personal emotion. "I always believed my condition was rare. I had no idea anyone else had it, much less a child who might hold the blueprint for remission." The doctor clasped his hands. "If you had access to advanced equipment, you could isolate these antibodies, potentially develop a treatment." By mid-afternoon, the sound of a helicopter's rotor blades reverberated through the dusty streets, whipping up swirls of sand. Concerned faces peered out of doorways as the helicopter landed awkwardly in an open lot. Out stepped Claire Bennett, hair disheveled by the wind but eyes blazing with purpose. She hurried into the clinic, calling for her son. Eli leaped off the cot, ignoring his sore joints, and ran straight into his mother's arms. Claire practically collapsed onto the floor, sobbing out a mixture of relief and anger. "My baby. Oh God, they told me you were gone." Ethan, watching from the next bed, felt a lump in his throat. He saw how tightly Claire clung to Eli, as if never wanting to let go. Later, once Claire's tears subsided, Dr. Brooks calmly showed her the lab notes and explained the parallel conditions. Ethan joined in to describe his own decades of research. Claire was wary at first. Life had taught her to be protective. Still,
She couldn't deny that something extraordinary was unfolding. When Ethan proposed that Eli come with him to Phoenix, to the main labs of Walker Pharmaceuticals for further testing, Claire stiffened. She had faced enough medical experiments that promised breakthroughs but delivered heartbreak or discomfort for her child. "I won't let you turn him into some lab rat," she said, voice shaking. Ethan raised both hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your concern, but I have no intention of imprisoning him. I simply want to take consistent blood samples and use state-of-the-art analysis. If we can decode his immunity, we could save thousands, maybe tens of thousands of lives, including ours." Claire's eyes flicked toward Eli, who stood next to Blaze outside the clinic window. The boy was stroking the Mustang's muzzle, whispering something into the horse's ear. Her protective instinct warred with the knowledge that this might offer real hope. At length, she nodded. "As long as I stay with him. No secrecy, no forced tests." "Agreed," said Ethan, relief evident in his smile. The decision had been made. Claire and Eli would travel to Phoenix alongside Ethan, who promised to spare no expense in ensuring Eli's comfort and well-being. The rest of that day was spent preparing. The townspeople of Dry Hollow gathered around, offering what help they could: food, water, and well wishes. Before the helicopter was ready for takeoff, Claire insisted on stepping outside with Eli. The open yard behind the clinic served as a temporary helipad, the rotor blades now silent. She knelt in front of her son, taking his hands in hers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice thick with guilt. "I should have protected you from Travis. I never thought he would do something so cruel." Eli shook his head. "It's not your fault, Mom. I don't blame you. I'm glad you found me." She pressed her lips together, tears brimming. Then she pulled him into a fierce hug. For a minute neither spoke, just a mother and child clinging to each other after days of unimaginable terror. Blaze meandered up behind them, lowering his head until his muzzle touched Claire's shoulder. She reached up, petting the horse's neck. "Thank you, Blaze," she murmured, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You saved my boy." A few onlookers dabbed at their eyes. Dr. Brooks smiled faintly, remembering a time he believed there were no miracles left in the world. Once the emotional waves calmed, Ethan approached. His posture was still somewhat hunched from pain, but he no longer appeared on the brink of death. "I've arranged for a ride to Phoenix, if that's all right. A pilot friend of mine is flying in from a nearby airstrip. We can load Blaze as well, though it'll be a bit tricky." Claire eyed the man carefully. "You sure you can manage that? A horse and a helicopter?" "We'll do it in 2 trips if we have to," Ethan replied. "Blaze won't be left behind." A flicker of admiration passed through Claire's features. "All right, but I'll be watching every step." She reiterated her non-negotiable term. Eli would be with her at all times, free to learn, play, and remain as normal a child as possible. If at any point he wanted to stop, they'd stop, Ethan agreed, wholeheartedly. "I was in your position once, powerless, at the mercy of doctors who didn't understand. I'd never force that on a child." He gestured to the battered Jeep parked nearby. "Let's just say I've gained a new perspective on what it means to be vulnerable." Eli listened, shifting from foot to foot. "Does this mean I can help other kids like me?" Ethan nodded. "Potentially. If your blood holds secrets, we might create a treatment so no one has to suffer alone in the dark." Eli looked from his mother to the man who shared his illness. "Then let's do it. If it means no one else gets abandoned, or has to live in fear of dying, I want to help." Claire's eyes shone with pride. She laid a hand on her son's shoulder. "We'll do this together," Blaze snorted, tapping a hoof against the dusty ground as if echoing the sentiment. Several townspeople chuckled, some patting the horse's flank. Even Maggie, tough as nails, wiped away a tear. When the helicopter arrived, an old rattling Huey repurposed for cargo, everyone in town lined up to bid farewell. Hugs were exchanged, and Dr. Brooks pressed a small pouch of herbal remedies into Claire's hand, just in case. Hank insisted on leading Blaze up a makeshift ramp. The horse settled surprisingly well, trusting Eli's presence. As the rotor blades roared to life, Eli clung to Claire's arm, heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. They were leaving behind the dust and desperation of the painted desert. Ahead lay Phoenix, a new chapter, and perhaps a cure that could change both their lives and the world. 8 months had passed since Eli, Claire, and Blaze arrived in Phoenix, alongside Dr. Ethan Walker. In that time, Walker Pharmaceuticals had become a hub of groundbreaking research. Teams of scientists, inspired by Eli's unique antibodies, worked tirelessly in the newly expanded labs. Thanks to Dr. Walker's unwavering focus and Claire's compassionate leadership, their discoveries rapidly took shape. Now, in a large auditorium at Walker Pharmaceuticals, hundreds of attendees, scientists, journalists, and patients gathered for a momentous occasion, the unveiling of Noven, the first ever drug capable of treating the once incurable Bennett-Walker syndrome. Standing at the podium under brilliant stage lights, Dr. Ethan Walker had never looked healthier or more confident. He wore a tailored suit and no longer needed a cane. The audience fell silent as he began to speak. 8 months ago, he said, voice steady yet emotional, I lay dying in the painted desert, convinced I would never witness a cure for our disease. Today, I'm honored to present Noven, the medication I once believed impossible. Applause broke out, a rousing ovation that seemed to shake the room. Camera flashes lit the stage. Eli, seated in the front row, gripped his mother's hand. Claire gave him a proud smile. Blaze, of course, was not in the auditorium itself, but his presence was everywhere in spirit. Pictures of the Mustang decorated the event posters, symbolizing the resilience and hope behind Noven's success. Once the applause subsided, Ethan cleared his throat, pressing a button on a nearby laptop. A huge screen behind him lit up, displaying a timeline of research milestones. He looked out at the crowd, scanning rows of faces that included top specialists and families affected by the illness. Today, he announced, we also recognize the disease's official name, Bennett-Walker syndrome. Bennett, in honor of the remarkable boy who provided the antibodies that made Noven possible, and Walker, for my own 30-year struggle. This naming is a tribute to collaboration, perseverance, and above all to Eli. The screen switched to a photo of Eli, beaming as he leaned against Blaze's flank. The caption read, the boy who changed modern medicine. The audience turned to see Eli, cheeks flushing at the sudden spotlight. He managed a shy wave, prompting more applause. Stepping aside, Ethan introduced representatives from various charities and international health organizations. He then delivered an announcement that took the audience by pleasant surprise. Because of Eli's generosity and the lessons we've learned from this journey, he said Walker Pharmaceuticals will distribute Noven free of charge to any diagnosed patient. Worldwide, we won't let finances stand between life and hope. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. In the corporate world, free distribution of a high-demand drug was nearly unprecedented. Ethan raised a hand, quieting the murmurs. Additionally, we're establishing the Hope Across the Desert Fund, providing families with direct financial and emotional support while they navigate this disease. Wild applause erupted. Claire, standing backstage, felt tears prick her eyes. She remembered all the nights she had prayed for a miracle, never dreaming it would come to this scale. The overhead lights dimmed, and Ethan gestured to the side wings. None of this would be possible without the commitment and compassion of a woman who understands better than anyone the pain and hope of raising a sick child. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Claire Bennett, our new Director of Family Outreach. Spotlights swung to reveal Claire, poised and confident in a crisp white suit. She walked across the stage, receiving a standing ovation. When she reached the microphone, she hesitated, a small, grateful smile on her lips. Not long ago, she began, voice unwavering. I believed my son would die alone in the desert, his illness misunderstood and untreated. Today I stand before you to say that no family should ever experience such despair again. Together we'll ensure thousands of children like Eli receive the care and empathy they deserve. Roars of approval filled the auditorium. Ethan offered her a handshake, which she returned with genuine warmth. At a cue from a stage coordinator, Claire stepped aside, and the spotlight fell on an 8-year-old boy who strolled onto the stage, leading a well-groomed, ribbon-adorned Blaze by a simple halter. People gasped. Few had expected an actual Mustang in a corporate auditorium, but the staff had cleared a safe path. Security and animal handlers stood discreetly ready in case Blaze spooked. Yet the horse displayed calm dignity, trusting Eli's presence. Eli looked taller, healthy. His rashes had disappeared, and the limp that once plagued him was gone. He stopped at center stage, giving Blaze a pat on the neck before gazing out at the crowd. Cameras flashed like staccato fireworks. A reporter near the front row raised a hand. "Eli, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Eli beamed, eyes flicking to Dr. Walker. "I want to be a doctor," he said, voice clear. "I want to find cures for diseases people say are hopeless." Cheers and laughter mingled with teary applause. More than one journalist dabbed at moist eye. Before concluding, Ethan invited everyone outside to the courtyard for a special unveiling. There, under a white drape, stood a newly crafted bronze statue. Hidden from view with a theatrical pull of a cord, the sheet fell away, revealing a small monument of Blaze standing protectively over a child. Blaze, hero of the desert, read the inscription etched at the base. "Loyal, brave, hope." A hush fell over the crowd, followed by a surge of applause and admiration. Eli wrapped both arms around Blaze's neck as the horse lowered his head, oblivious to the ceremony yet content to stand in the midst of so much acclaim. Claire joined her son, whispering words of thanks to the Mustang who had done more than any human might have imagined. In that moment, Ethan couldn't help but marvel. We've come so far from scorching sand and desperation to this place of healing and celebration. In the weeks following Eleven's official launch, the media in Prescott reported a surprising development. Travis Miller, the man responsible for abandoning Eli, had turned himself in to the authorities. Public outcry and an ongoing police investigation had pressured him. Leaving no room to hide, he was promptly charged with deliberate child endangerment and reckless abandonment, ultimately receiving a 12-year prison sentence. When Claire first heard the news, she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, while Eli, now fully aware of Travis's betrayal, turned away and pressed his face into Blaze's mane. No words were necessary. The justice system had done its part, and the small family chose to look forward. They had a new life, rich with promise, that no longer needed to be overshadowed by one man's cruelty. A few days later, a soft golden light bathed the research center's rear gardens. After a full schedule of media interviews, congratulatory luncheons, and endless questions about the miracle cure, Ethan, Claire, and Eli yearned for a moment of peace. Blaze, freshly brushed and content, ambled along beside them, seemingly unimpressed by the fanfare. The garden itself had been designed to replicate the Sonoran desert in miniature. Succulents, cacti, and desert wildflowers dotted the sandy beds. A gentle breeze whispered through the low shrubs, carrying with it the faint scent of evening primrose. Overhead, the Arizona sky glowed with a brilliant orange hue, as though the horizon were on fire. Eli ran ahead to explore. Despite his sophisticated surroundings, he remained a child enthralled by the simplest treasures. Claire walked arm in arm with Ethan, her posture relaxed at last. They spoke quietly of new expansions for Walker Pharmaceuticals, more labs, more scholarship programs for young scientists. For the first time, Claire's mind wasn't riddled with fear. She had room to dream beyond survival. Blaze paused to graze on a patch of fresh desert grass, flicking his tail in contentment. The day was indeed special. For once, no cameras, no crowds, just the hush of oncoming twilight, and the promise of tomorrow. Suddenly, Eli let out a small cry of delight. He'd discovered a narrow rock formation near one corner of the garden, where a tiny, pure white flower sprouted from a crack. Its petals looked impossibly delicate against the rugged stone and sand. "Mom, Ethan," Eli called, waving them over. Blaze followed, ears pricked. Eli carefully cradled the blossom in his palm.
"Look, a miracle flower, right?" he asked, grinning. Blaze actually sniffed it out first. Claire crouched down to examine it, her expression softening. "Even in the harshest ground, beauty can grow," she said. Ethan knelt beside her, lightly brushing a finger across the petals. "Sometimes the rarest wonders arise where we least expect them," he murmured. Blaze let out a gentle snort, nudging Eli's arm. The boy chuckled. "You found it. Boy, maybe we'll plant its seed somewhere we can see it every day." They strolled onward, passing a row of saguaro cacti. Eli skipped a short distance ahead, guiding Blaze by the halter. Claire lagged behind, taking in the quiet hush of the evening. That was when Ethan spoke, voice low. "Claire," he began, "Eli mentioned something last night. Apparently, he told me he wants me to live with you both. I know it's sudden, but what do you think?" Claire paused. A gentle gust ruffled her hair. She turned to regard Ethan with thoughtful eyes. "It's not sudden, really," she said softly. You've become part of our lives in more ways than one, and you understand Eli's journey better than anyone else. We'd be happy to have you stay with us, if it's what you truly want. A sense of relief and profound gratitude washed over Ethan. For so many years, he'd clung to life solely through research, ambition, and the faint hope of a cure. Now he felt something far more fulfilling: belonging. They caught up to Eli, who was crouched beside Blaze, stroking the horse's muzzle. The boy beamed when he noticed them. Mom? Ethan, did you see the flower? We have to plant it near the lab, so everyone knows this place had a real miracle. Claire laughed lightly. Yes. Sweetheart, we'll do that. A little reminder that hope can bloom anywhere. Ethan placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, eyes shining. I agree. You and Blaze already taught me that miracles don't wait for permission. They just happen when least expected. The desert sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of ruby and gold. In that moment, all four, Ethan, Claire, Eli, and Blaze, stood close together, gazing out at the horizon. There were no grand speeches left to make, no battles left to fight. That evening, only the gentle hush of wind and the quiet thrum of hearts beating in unison. As the last sliver of daylight slipped below the distant mountains, Claire felt Eli tug at her sleeve. Mom, he said, lifting the flower he'd collected, I'm going to plant this in the yard, so people know we had a miracle here. She brushed a hand through his hair. And that miracle started with you, my love. Ethan, his face warm with an emotion he'd long forgotten how to name, placed a gentle hand on Eli's back. Above them, the sky's colors deepened into twilight, a cosmic canvas hinting at infinite possibility. In that silent glow, they began the next chapter of their lives, walking together in peaceful understanding. A mother, her brave son, a redeemed scientist, and the Mustang who had made it all possible. No words were needed to seal the bond. It was enough to share the stillness of the moment, to feel the embrace of the desert's lingering warmth, and to believe that whatever came next, they would face it as a family, united by faith, love, and an unbreakable promise that had begun under the most unlikely circumstance. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. Dr. Marin leaned in gently. His vitals are low, but the will, that's what's keeping him here. Deputy Rourke watched the horizon. No kid should have survived that distance alone, he muttered. But maybe he wasn't alone at all. Eli didn't remember collapsing, but he remembered the warmth of muscle and breath. A wild horse, born of dust and flame, had chosen him. Eli didn't remember collapse, but he remembered the warmth of muscle and breath. A wild horse, born of dust and flame, had chosen him. Eli Navarro's legs ached, his tiny feet dragging through burning sand. But in front of him, Iron Hoof waited, still, proud, as if summoned by fate. Deputy Rourke watched the horizon. No kid should have survived that distance alone, he muttered. But maybe he wasn't alone at all. Deputy Rourke watched the horizon. No kid should have survived that distance alone, he muttered. But maybe he wasn't alone at all. Eli Navarro's legs ached, his tiny feet dragging through burning sand. But in front of him, Iron Hoof waited, still, proud, as if summoned by fate. Eli Navarro's legs ached, his tiny feet dragging through burning sand. But in front of him, Iron Hoof waited, still, proud, as if summoned by fate.